Love helping your clients but hate sales and marketing, but somehow you ended up with sales and marketing responsibilities? Then this is the podcast for you. Hi, Chief Nerd Ruben Swartz here. I spent a long time learning these lessons the hard way, and I want to help you learn them the easy way by sharing my experiences and talking with brilliant people who have figured out how to hack not just the code, but the sales and marketing process as well. Of course, as a nerdy person who hated struggling with complex CRMs, I had to create my own CRM for people who actually hate selling, which sounds like an oxymoron, but if it sounds interesting to you, check it out at Mimiran.com. That's Mimiran.com. And whether or not you need a new CRM, you'll find proposal templates and sample lead magnets to help you grow your business. Now let's get to it. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Meg Cumby. She started out as a journalist, but has actually spent most of her career as a communications professional, working for government departments, a PR agency, and then also as a freelancer and consultant. And then she actually has one of the most interesting niches that I have seen. She developed a specialty in helping consultants get testimonials, which obviously is hugely important for sales and marketing. And for some reason, it's like one of those things, kind of like most of sales and marketing, a lot of us don't necessarily put as much effort into as we should. And so Meg is here to tell us how we can do better at getting and sharing testimonials. Welcome to Sales for Nerds, Meg.
Thanks, Ruben.
All right, first question. What do you have in your glass?
So I have an Anciano Gran Reserva Tempranillo from Spain.
Awesome.
Yeah, I find it's just a really easy drinking, smooth drinking wine that's a pretty good crowd pleaser. And it looks nice and fancy in the bottle.
There you go. And you'll have to send me a link to that so that I can spell it appropriately in the show notes.
Absolutely.
And I've got some Cooper Jackson Pinot Noir. And if you are just coming off the previous episode, you may have noticed that I was drinking that then as well, because I am doing something that it's funny because ironically enough, when I had Laura Briggs on, she was talking about how you should just do like a whole day and record all your episodes back to back. And you can even change shirts in between. And I was like, well, there's a flaw in that for me because of the wine component, right? By the end of the day, I might not have such high quality interviews. And so I was sort of debating, like I've never done back to back before. And I was like, well, two should be okay, right? So here we are.
Good to know.
So anyway, tell me how you went from journalism to consulting.
Yeah, I kind of took a bit of a path there. I guess a lot of people do in their careers. I got my degree in journalism, did a few internships at some papers, some newspapers, so mostly focusing on print journalism. And then pretty soon after graduating, went right into government communications, just more stability and a lot of different factors in that. And then I found myself later on, actually, there were some layoffs. So I found myself working for a PR firm and then trying freelancing for a little bit before going back to government and then realizing I preferred working in the private sector. So I decided to go back to freelancing and consulting after going back to government and realizing that wasn't really for me. So that sort of set me on a path to find other consultants and freelancers. And eventually this idea for this productized service sort of came out. Instead of doing just generalist communications, which I had been doing for several clients, maybe I could create this productized service out of helping people get testimonials and later case studies. And so I've grown that service over the last 3 years, and now I'm focusing exclusively on it.
Awesome. Before you developed this niche, how did you find your clients?
Largely through relationships that I developed, over the course of my career and some introductions that some, people had made. So, I had a very small roster of clients. I had 2 main clients and then some other smaller clients to sort of fill in some of the gaps. And they were wonderful to work with. But really, like a lot of people's businesses, it really was based on those developing those relationships.
Developing and maintaining, I imagine, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And finding people with an ongoing need. So, it was a lot of, starting out with subcontracting work and things like that.
Okay. Now, how did you come up with the idea of, what people really need?
Testimonials. Yeah. It was a really slow idea to come forward. I started by going to a conference, where there was other freelancers. And this idea came out of one conversation with somebody who mentioned, I have a hard time getting testimonials. And what I was looking for was a service that I could use more of my interview skills for, not just my writing skills and my communication skills. I really enjoy speaking with people and having those conversations and pulling the best parts of those out, really going back to almost my journalism roots. So,
right.
And so somebody had sort of brought up the idea and I was like, oh, that's a good idea. And that conversation went nowhere. And I really left it thinking that there would be nobody else interested in it. I didn't do anything with the idea until the next conference I went to with other freelancers consultants. And I got other people interested. I sort of talked about the idea a little bit more. They're like, oh, that's interesting. Got a few people to pilot it. And then it just sort of snowballed from there, talking with more people, in part of an online community, freelance camp. We're both in freelance camp, talked with more people there and got involved. The more I talked with people, the more it started to snowball. So it's not something that happened overnight. That's for sure. I still did my main communication service for a long time. So I didn't just flip a switch, that's for sure, to focus on this. I think that might be true when you're exploring a new niche. It's not something that happens overnight.
Got it. Okay. It's funny because I remember seeing your profile or something you posted in Freelance Camp and going to your site and thinking, gosh, that makes so much sense. Why didn't I think of that? And the irony is that there are times when I end up doing something sort of related to what you do for folks using my software. They're trying to set up a lead magnet and they're like, well, I don't even know what the heck I do for my clients. And I'm like, well, have you thought about asking them?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no, it feels really awkward. Can you do that, please? And so I'll pick up the phone and call them and talk to them. And it's amazing because the clients feel so amazing. They feel great afterwards. Like, wow, I didn't even know I did all that cool stuff for them.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I wasn't trying to steal your thunder.
No.
It was just like, when I went to your site, I was like, that's great. So, and it's interesting that, even though I had that reaction the first time I saw it, you didn't necessarily have that reaction the first time you considered it.
No, absolutely not. And I think that's the thing. It's only when I really knew I had something. I was part of, some of your listeners may be familiar with Kai Davis, and I was part of a freelancer marketing acceleration program. It was sort of a group coaching thing that he was running a couple of years back. And one of the sessions, literally somebody said, I feel so awkward asking for testimonials. And we just talked about that the entire time. And I was like, I think I really might have something here when people are talking for probably a good 40 minutes about how painful this is. And couldn't I just get somebody else to do it for me? Or how do I do it on my own? How do I make this easier? There clearly is a pain that I felt. And then just, more and more conversations. I think that's really the key when you're looking into those sort of things, is just have more conversations, talk more until if you're seeing people's eyes prick up or eyes light up a little bit when you're talking about it and asking questions, it's a sign that there's interest. To keep having those conversations was key for me.
Okay. So before we get into, I want to get into the mechanics of testimonials in a second. Mm-hmm. But for folks out there who are like, who needs testimonials? Because I assume some people are like, I haven't had them and I'm fine or whatever.
Yes.
Like, why are they so important?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really down to the very basic concept of social proof, which, I always like to define things, even if, so we're all on the same page of, talking about things. But basically, social proof being a third party or some sort of, not even a third party, but a demonstration to back, like that's not just your words saying, to back up your claim, basically. So, social proof, and usually through a third party. So, I mean, having somebody else say that the investment that you're going to make, by hiring this person is going to pay off. Having somebody who's not selling something
right
say that is so powerful. And I think, all you have to do is like look back on your own, are you going to go to a restaurant that has great reviews, or that somebody that has the similar tastes as you, or, that is recommended, or are you going to go with the one that you know nothing about from anybody else? Some people may feel like they've done fine without it, and that's could be absolutely true, but it is a powerful tool to use, and you've got this opportunity to take advantage of when somebody's excited about your service, to capture that feeling and use it. If even if you don't use it right now, to use it when you need it. It's far better to capitalize on that opportunity now.
Okay, so that's a great point. So let's segue into the actual mechanics. When do you ask for a testimonial?
I would say there's two main factors you want to take into account when you're thinking about when to ask. It can either be when you've wrapped up an engagement, and either right after you've wrapped up the engagement, or when they're likely to have seen the results. And the other time you can do it is during an engagement. Perhaps you've got a very long-term engagement and it makes sense after a big win. The thing that kind of ties all those things together is that when your client's going to exude the enthusiasm for what you've done and can speak to how you have helped them.
Okay.
And why the investment's paid off. So, thinking about thinking about those inflection points, if you're not sure, just picking at the end of the engagement is fine. If you're, you don't want to get crippled by indecision about picking when.
Okay. So if there isn't totally obvious, wait till you've shown the results. They've got the win. You're wrapping up or you've just wrapped up.
Absolutely.
And then what do you do? How do you ask?
Absolutely. I even like to set up the expectation before I ask. To make it easier, to make that for me to feel more comfortable, and also so that I'm not springing it on the client. I like to recommend to set that expectation even if you've got onboarding materials at the beginning, just mentioning that at the end of your engagement or whenever it makes sense to you, that you'll have a wrap-up call, and at that time you'll ask for a wrap-up call to get their feedback, and then at that time you'll ask to use some of their feedback in the form of a testimonial with their permission. So really just setting that expectation at the start helps a lot. And then to actually make the ask, then you've already set up the expectation to ask. So when that trigger point comes, say like, hey, great. All that remains is for us to have a wrap-up call and to talk about your feedback. And again, with your permission, I'd love to use some of this as part of a testimonial. I mean, now I'm describing a situation where you gather it on the phone. There's an option to do it in email, asking a few questions via email. We can talk, more about the advantages. There's advantages and disadvantages to doing it both ways. I tend towards the phone way, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think email, because for most of my career, I would have gone with email, and I did go with email because I was trying to avoid picking up the phone.
Yes.
And I find that it's much better to pick up the phone. And then if you need to, you can always have some follow-on email after the phone call, but don't chicken out and be scared to pick up the phone.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, listeners, loyal listeners of your podcast will know you're going to always advocate to pick up the phone for sure. I like it, especially because it doesn't put, we're all email overloaded. It doesn't put it as an item on the to-do list for the client. It puts you on their calendar instead of their to-do list, much more likely that you'll get it out of them. And also, it's just easier sometimes for people to talk rather than type. Writer's block can be really tough. So, and then, you can probe for more information. It often also, like, the language is more natural when they're speaking rather than when they're writing, more often than not. So, yeah.
And stuff will kind of tumble out of them that they may not have known was in there that wouldn't necessarily come out during an email back and forth, where people tend to be a little bit more tensed up. And one thing I like to do is say, okay, I've taken notes. I'm just going to send this to you for final approval. And you can edit it a little bit if there's, a little bit of rambling on in there.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. And that's a huge part too. Offering them the opportunity to look over it afterwards. I mean, it can feel I highly recommend recording the call. Don't rely on your notes. Nobody can, even as a journalist, I found it very difficult to keep up with people as they speak. It is very unlikely you'll capture the richness of the language, and you'll find yourself scrambling. And it's just so much better to record the call. And then I like using a transcription service. But it's up to you how much you want to outsource and do yourself.
That's interesting. I'm usually scribbling furiously.
Absolutely. And there's nothing, like, I actually take notes while on the call, but I still record.
Okay.
Because for one thing, it gives you a backup.
Right.
And then for other things, it would be very surprising. Even the best note taker, I think, could still lose parts of what the client has said during the call. And it just allows you to focus your attention on the conversation and then not have to wait for very long pauses for you to catch up.
Sure.
There's advantages to leaving pauses as well. Of course, you want to leave some pauses, but maybe it's just more important to clients are busy and just try to keep the time as tight as possible.
Now, in terms of format, obviously, if you've got text, you can put it anywhere and it's easy. What about video testimonials?
Video testimonials are so powerful. I'll always extol their virtues. I remember when I was in journalism school, we always talked about there's increasing credibility as you go from print to radio to TV. Okay. Because you're actually seeing the person say the words. It's harder to edit. And so it does come across as more credible. It can be a higher barrier to getting the testimonial. Right. Both on your part and on the client's part. Okay. Depending on the type of clients you're selling to, you may want a very polished video. That's obviously, it can get quite expensive to get a really polished setup if you're doing like not just a webcam call, for example. Like, if you're selling depends on the type of clients you're selling to that you'd want to match, the rest of your website with, for example. The other thing is some people feel very nervous talking on camera and they can't edit their words afterwards. Like, so for the client, it can offer just a bit of a barrier that way, and they may not like how they look.
Right.
It introduces more barriers, and I feel like you can get, a very unscientific pulling a number, 70% of the effectiveness with a written testimonial as you can with a video testimonial, and it's just easier for both parties often.
So if you can get a video testimonial, great, but don't sweat it if you can't. Is that basically the story?
Absolutely. And I wouldn't recommend starting with video testimonials.
Okay.
To as you dip your toe into getting testimonials, it's easier to start with the written, I would think. So.
And I'm not an expert at this by any means, so Meg, please correct me. But one thing that I found useful also with video testimonials is showing people, hey, we're going to edit this.
Oh, for sure.
And we're going to edit out all your ums and ahs and the stuff where you're kind of rambling on, and you'll have final approval over it, et cetera, et cetera. And I've had people who were so excited to do it, and then it took them a month to approve it because they were just like, I just don't want to see myself on video. And it took a long time, but they were excited and they really wanted to do it. And finally they were like, okay, I'm not even going to look at it. I just trust you.
Yes.
So just release it. That's fine. But it's definitely a lot more work than, a 5-minute, yes, that's what I said. Great. Put it on your website kind of situation.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it can take longer to schedule. It just, so many things. I'm not a fan of introducing barriers.
Got it.
Yeah. It's not something I've gone down a long path for, but there's no question that the credibility just shoots right up with them.
So just FYI, if you go to Meg's website, megcumby.com, which we'll have a link to in the show notes, of course, there is a huge page of testimonials, of glowing testimonials. So that's good, right? Because you don't want to be like the cobbler whose kids have no shoes.
Absolutely.
But they are all text testimonials, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've only got text testimonials for sure. So right now, I think I might introduce some audio testimonials to experiment with them and see if that's a way to do it. Again, it's just stepping up that ladder. And then, who knows, maybe some in the later times, introduce some video testimonials. But right now, it's also the service I offer. So it helps to showcase. It's almost a testable credential. People can see the testimonials I put together with my clients.
Right.
And then, of course, I can point to the testimonials on their sites, as well. So it just sort of helps, with that. It's another form of social proof in a way.
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about how to ask for testimonials and what to do. And what about the actual content of the testimonial? What makes an effective one? Obviously you want people to just say amazing, amazing stuff, but sometimes people can say amazing stuff. It may not resonate with somebody who reads it on your site. How do you do this properly so that it's not a waste of everyone's time?
The biggest thing that you need to do is offer structure. So you don't get on the phone with them and just say, so tell me about what, I did for you. That's not going to result in an effective testimonial. I guess there's two parts of the question there, which is what makes an effective testimonial and then how do you get it?
Okay.
So what makes an effective testimonial? Really, I point to three main elements. It should be about the client, not about you, or much more about the client than about you. It's their story. It should talk about the challenge they faced, how you were able to work together and what the results they achieved for. Because that's what people are investing in your services for, is for the results that you can get them. So you don't want to talk about how awesome you are at your craft. You want to talk about where the client was able to go after working with you. So it should be about them. And with that said, it also should not paint them as a damsel in distress and you're the hero coming in. Like, it should be them as the hero. Like, they were smart. They've made this investment. Here's the results they achieved.
Right.
You are more of a catalyst,
right.
And I think I saw a talk with Austin Church once who said, you're Yoda. Your client's Luke Skywalker. They're the hero. You're the Jedi master that's just there to mentor them.
That's so funny. I have a slide where I have Obi-Wan and Luke.
Yes.
And I'm talking about proposals before the sale, right? It's like, it's
exactly.
the customer's story. It's not yours. You're the old man who helps.
That's exactly it.
But you're right. It's the same principle with the testimonial.
Different movie.
So that's the first one.
Absolutely. Second part is it should tell a small story. There should be some conflict. You mentioned there, but tell me all these wonderful things about you. It gets kind of sugary and boring. Stories should have a bit of conflict, starting with a challenge. I was facing this challenge, but then, found this solution. I had this hesitation before, talking about objections that clients have, because a testimonial really is speaking to your potential clients as they're facing an objection. They're thinking that, yes, I have this problem. This could be a solution, but what if they're full of it? What if it's not the right fit for me? Really, it should, if you draw out those objections that your clients faced before they bought from you, it really does help tell that story in an interesting way. And then it also really help overcome those objections, because then you go into the results, which is the third part, which should show the impact that the client saw from working with you, being very specific about the benefits and results that they saw, tying it to the work that you've done with them. Like, not just see like, 87% increase in conversion rate. If that's the result you helped them achieve, how did your work help them get there? Because how do I know that's not from something else?
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they're sitting down with their friend at lunch, talking about this amazing experience they had with you, right? They're not just putting a bunch of marketing crap on a website. It's like, hey, I was having this problem and I saw this thing. And at first I was skeptical because it looked just like X, Y, and Z, but it turns out it was totally different, or it had this important difference that really worked for me and blah, 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 blah. And therefore I was able to, oh my God, it's so great.
Yeah, exactly that. It really reframes it in a way. And that also makes it a little easier to ask, because you're not asking them to say, tell me how great I am.
Right.
It's really help tell the story of like why this was a worthwhile endeavor for you. It's an interesting one. So in terms of how to get that, it's really about structuring it around, like not just asking them to tell that story. It's asking them specific questions to get the material to tell that story. I largely base the questions that I recommend and ask on Sean D'Souza's questions that he lists in a book called The Brain Audit. And there's 6 questions, and they're very good at surfacing those things that help make an effective testimonial. I changed them a little bit for a consulting context because they're meant to apply to both products and services. So I sort of massage them a little bit so that they fit for a consulting context. And I also add in a couple to fill in a couple of the blanks for these longer, more detailed testimonials that I like to do with my clients.
So can we run through the 6 questions real quick?
Absolutely. And what I end up doing is I actually end up doing 9.
Okay.
I have an article on my website that we can link to in the show notes that lists these questions. So people don't have to take notes furiously. Right. They can enjoy the podcast without having to scramble to take notes. So I like to start with, this one's not in Sean's questions, but I like to start with what was the challenge that led you to engage me, or what led you to engage me. Sometimes people prefer opportunity. Basically, what brought them to your door.
Okay.
That helps, highlight a really key thing. Moving into one of Sean's questions, which would be, what hesitations or concerns, if any, did you have before making the decision to engage me? Mm-hmm. I believe Sean puts it like, what obstacle might have prevented you from making this purchase? But essentially surfacing that objection.
Sure.
I add in, what made you choose to work with me instead of another consultant or doing the work in-house? Mm-hmm. Kind of highlighting those, sort of that decision process. What did you find as a result of this project? Mm-hmm. You can add in, as a follow-up question, why was it worth the investment? And following up with a why is that important? Mm-hmm. If they're not really getting to the business outcome or the, business results, if they're focusing more on deliverables, then sometimes those questions can help surface the results that the client saw. What specific feature or benefit did you like most about the service you received? Mm-hmm. That often highlights just that top thing, that the reason why the client thinks it's the best, that it helped them. What are 2 or 3 other benefits you saw? Adding numbers can really help focus, as opposed to just offering, an open-ended thing. Okay. Because I like to frame, when I ask it as for a testimonial, as a feedback opportunity. I also add in what could have been improved or gone better, mm-hmm. even with the benefit of hindsight. Right. Which kind of gives the client a bit of an out to be able to say something that could have gone better, because nobody likes giving negative or less than positive feedback. So by framing it that way, you're not saying, what did I do wrong? You're mm-hmm. just saying, hey, basically, if we could do it over again, what would you like to see changed? And that can help inform improvements in your service or your marketing. And
great point.
And then, rounding it out, would you recommend me to others, and why? Obviously, they're participating. They probably are going to recommend you, and then asking why. This is the question usually where those typical testimonial comments will come out, about how excellent you are at your craft and why you're the right person to go with. So it's, not a bad idea to have that opportunity, but sometimes some surprising details come in there. And then offering if there is anything else that the client would like to add at the end. You always want to offer that opportunity, because you never know what they might not have had an opportunity to say yet. So. Right. Yeah.
That's great. Fantastic. And like I said, we'll have a link to that in the show notes. So if you're driving your car or riding your bike or whatever, don't worry. Something I like to ask too, which I'm not an expert, was okay, you'd recommend me, but who would you recommend me to?
Absolutely.
And try to get some of that open-ended feedback about, well, it's, people like me who are struggling with X, but don't fit into Y, which is what the big 800-pound gorilla deals with or whatever.
I've absolutely added in that question too. I like to really dig in and sometimes ask in some follow-up questions, but it's absolutely a good one, especially if you're wondering who you're going to get referred to, like who's in the mind of the client. That's an excellent question to reveal, and I've absolutely added it in when that's been valuable to uncover.
Okay, so now you're going to get a bunch of stuff that you have to go edit, presumably, right? Like now the real journalism work starts. So how do you take this and compile it into something that is coherent and comprehensive, but also short enough to drop in a little web testimonial or wherever you're going to use it?
Number one, if you're shorter on space, you can ask less questions. Or not use the answers to those questions, if you want. So, because the questions I ask end up in these longer, probably 300 words testimonials or more sometimes. So that's one thing you can do. And also you can use a longer testimonial in some places and an excerpt in other places. But to get back to your original question about how to compile this. So compile something that the client will sign off on so that you can actually use it and, use it however you'd like. The order that you ask the questions in will pretty much determine, it's pretty much in order of the flow of the testimonial. You might have noticed as I was going through there, it sort of walks through the challenge and then this, more of the solution and what they found as a result and the benefits and why they'd recommend you. It kind of already follows this natural flow.
Sure.
But it takes some time sometimes to massage people's, answers into a more concise thing. I like just separating out, first of all, taking out all my questions and then, bringing out the client's responses, making an outline, with the key points and okay, really these are the key points I have to hit, on a separate page. Like I'm very much one of those iterative writers. I start like chipping away at things and then edit it down to what's really the core stuff without changing the language of too much of the clients.
Right.
Keeping that intact as much as possible. You can bring together two thoughts, they said something here and said here, you can merge that into one sentence, but really maintaining as much of that language, intact as possible. So, it takes practice, but it's definitely doable. And if you want to start more on something easier, then like you could start with asking those, or like those core 6 questions and start with crafting something from that. The key things you really want to, like I said, make sure you do is surface the objection, because that's going to be it's going to stand out over other testimonials when you really surface that objection. Talk about, the results and tie it to what you've done. Those are really if you had to cut everything down, obviously it's stronger when you do, give the fuller picture, but really those are the 3 most important things I think that are part of a testimonial.
Okay. And you raised a great point, which is you can have a page-long or 2-page-long case study, which is even more powerful. And then you can take little snippets of it and use them as those little testimonial blurbs.
Absolutely.
In other places. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely. I use the same process to create case studies with my clients and just use the quotes from and still letting the client's story drive that case study. But so a case study, would be more of telling the story from a third party perspective with quoting the client to support the points.
Got it.
And so, you can do that too if that's easier for you. I find it's a slightly longer process, but if it's easier for you, then you can do that. Really, I like to have something that you want to be able to have something in the fuller format that the client can approve, and then you can take excerpts and use them as you need to.
Got it. Okay. And so you could basically have language that says, hey, do you approve this and allow me to excerpt it?
Oh, absolutely.
And then when you actually post these case studies and testimonials, can we get into some of the best practices there? Because I noticed, at least for me, when I'm a visitor and I'm looking at a website, there's a big difference between, hey, here's a picture of Meg and it says Meg Cumby and there's a link to your site versus, MC in Canada.
Oh, yes.
with no picture. And I'm like,
Yeah. No, absolutely. And when we're talking about these, keeping in mind too that as much as I say any testimonial is better than no testimonial, it's funny. I did have a conversation with someone recently and they said great, when I see one testimonial on a site, they're like, great, you have a friend that said something nice about you. So it is often more powerful if you can get a couple on there to start. But recognizing that it's a journey, you can improve your testimonials over time. That being said, some of the best practices would be, yeah, not just putting them on your testimonials page or your social proof page, putting them throughout the site. Full names, if you possibly can, absolutely. Company with position, if you're selling B2B. If you're selling B2C, obviously full name, and if you can, location is also a good one to have in there.
Picture
for sure. And I say that if people go right away on my site, they'll notice that there's not pictures on my testimonials that I've gathered for myself. And it's something I'm about to put in place is to grab those headshots. It's funny when, the reason why I didn't have it is because I couldn't figure out how to nicely put them in with the template I was using. So, so again, more important don't let those details not publish the testimonial. I've got the full names and the businesses and, the links to the website. I knew it would be more important to get them up immediately than worry about whether or not I had the picture. That being said, pictures add credibility and you definitely should add it. But I share that to say, again, don't let any of these be stumbling blocks from getting a testimonial, putting it up. You can always improve. Other best practice for testimonial, full name. We've talked about that, and photo, and using them not just on your website or your page, but you can use them in sales conversations as a follow-up in an email. You can use them in your email signature. You can use them in proposals. If you do proposals, I absolutely would recommend you include testimonials from people like your client or other similar projects you've done.
Amen.
100%. Do not waste that asset. Don't assume that somebody's going to go to your webpage and look at your testimonials. If you've created something for a client, a proposal or a quote, include a testimonial.
Especially if you've got some that are directly relevant to that situation. And even if your sponsor has been to your website, when they circulate that proposal around the office, you have to assume that for a lot of people, the only thing they're going to see is your proposal.
Mm-hmm. And again, don't stress if you don't have ones that aren't exactly like that client. If you've got testimonials to speak to the fact that you're reliable, that you deliver on what you promise, and that you have generated results that you've promised to other people, that's a strong piece of social proof. It is stronger when it's a similar project or a similar type of client. But again, don't knock the assets that you have. You can always aim to get another testimonial in the future that will speak more to those types of projects you want to get. But I think the key thing is just to actually do it and improve over time.
It makes a lot of sense. And you actually brought up something that I wanted to ask you, which is if you've only got one or you've got your first one, right? Do you put it up or do you need to wait for some certain minimum threshold?
I think you go ahead and put it up. And then make it a very high priority. Okay. Especially if it does get into these details about how you've actually delivered results. When it's credible, when it's believable, use it. Absolutely. But make it a very high priority to get your second and your third. I think 3 is a good number to start with, but I don't think holding on to it's a good idea because it might just get down to the bottom of your to-do list. And then make it a high priority to get those next couple of testimonials as soon as you can.
Got it. So as long as it's not like Ruben is awesome, MC in Canada.
Exactly.
If you got a real testimonial, go ahead and put it up there.
Use it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think just be wary that it's going to be stronger when you have more.
Well, thanks so much, Meg. I really appreciate your insight. Thanks for coming on. How's that Tempranillo treating you?
It's lovely. Thank you. How's your Pinot Noir?
Very good. So we'll have links to all those questions in the show notes. And if people want to reach out and find you other than megcumby.com, where should they go?
That's the best spot.
Okay.
I do also have a Twitter account that people will notice I don't post, but I do check it. So they could also go in there. But the best way to reach out to me would be megcumby.com, and my email's on there. And, certainly if anybody's interested in working with me, there's a link there. I also have a few articles that people, like I said, people can steal the questions for themselves. I have an article on there talking about the advantage of the interview versus doing email questions or survey as well, if people are curious about which might be best for them.
Awesome. So if you have been on the fence or you're like, gosh, sales would be so much easier, marketing would be so much easier if I just had some testimonials, but unfortunately I've been so busy serving my clients, I don't have testimonials up. Here's your answer. Go talk to people. Let them brag a little bit about how smart they are to solve their problem with your help and get it up on your website.
Absolutely.
Cheers, Meg. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. If you have a friend who would benefit from this episode, please pass the word along. Have a friend who wouldn't benefit, but you haven't talked to in a while? Give them a call. iTunes reviews are great to get the word out and help me create the show that's most useful to you. And if you're frustrated with your sales and marketing process or lack thereof, check out Memorin, the CRM for people who hate selling. Until next time.